the world because most of the world's countries are connected to us. So, thank you, sir. So it costs, say you've got your Visa card and it's connected to a bank, and you are basically borrowing money when you go and buy something on that credit card. You're borrowing money, and the bank there lends that money to you. Now, they have to get the money from somewhere, right? They can't always just rely upon their deposits and the fees and things they charge to make them enough money so that they can lend you money. So they get their money from the Federal Reserve, right, which is a private organization. It is not a government entity, even though it's called federal. It's only called federal because it applies to the whole country, all 50 states. That's the reason it's called federal. Okay, so the Federal Reserve prints the money. Okay, again, a private institution has no connection officially or organically, let's say, organizationally with the government. Okay, so it prints the money, and there's value to the money based upon the value of all of the goods and services in the United States. All right, that the Federal Reserve has, you might say, as collateral. Right. So it gets that money. Right now, it gets that money at 2% or 2.5%, something around there. It used to be 0 or 1. They raised it, the last couple times they met, and they raised their rates. Okay, so they give that money to your bank at 2%. Okay, let's just say 2%. Okay, then you go and you buy a TV and you put it on your bank credit card. Okay, it may say Visa, it may say MasterCard, but those are just pass-through entities. They don't really, the money's not with them. The money's with the bank that's the card is given by. Right? The bank then has that money, gets that money from the Federal Reserve at 2%. Right? Then you buy the TV, and let's say you pay $1,000 for a TV, nice. Okay, and then you don't pay that off, let's say, in 30 days. Okay, then the bank charges you 7 or 8% or 9% or 10%, or in many cases 17, 18, 19, 20% maybe. Okay, and the New Testament, if the New Testament would speak on that, I think it would speak to the greed. Okay, that's kind of overdoing it, right? If you're having to pay somebody 2% for the money you get, but then you're charging somebody else 20%. That's overboard. That you're making more than you really need to make. Okay, you're not just making back your money. You're making back your money, many times over. Okay, so the New Testament would speak to that. The Old Testament, of course, would say you don't charge them anything, but that's not repeated in the New Testament. So we can't say that is absolutely against God's law. We can say, okay, a laborer is worthy of his hire, Paul says. Okay? In other words, your time is valuable, your money is valuable, or your effort is valuable. And the bank's time is valuable, and the bank's effort is valuable. So, if you get that money for 2 and you want to charge 4, that's fine. The New Testament would not, Jesus would not bark about that. He would not complain about that. Or maybe even 8. Again, would not complain about it. All right? So the law is holy. God's restrictions on interest, again, just using that as an example, is a good thing. It's something that comes out of God's holiness. And Christians, believers, should not therefore bark about it. They should not complain about it. They should not say this is wrong that God allows this, or this is wrong that He hasn't repeated this in the New Testament. No, God does not make mistakes. So you can say, well, it's God's will that a person gets repaid or recompensed for the time and effort that he gives, or the value of the money that he lends. He's due something back for that. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. The capitalistic system is not ungodly on its face. On the other hand, neither is the communist system. That's not wrong on its face either. The Bible and God's law would allow for that. And we, being capitalists, we can't point at the communist system and say, well, somehow the allowance of that by God is wrong, and God was wrong to allow that. God should make sure that that doesn't occur anywhere, that nobody gets the idea of doing that. That would be going against God. Okay? So this is what the essence of the whole thing is. The laws that God has commanded are all good, whether we like them or not. So when churches, for example, would say, well, the capitalist system is wrong, that is calling God wrong. Churches that come out and say more obvious ones, like gay marriage is okay, well, that is very clearly against God's law. And so therefore, again, they're calling God stupid. They're calling God unwise. They're calling God less than perfect, because God very clearly in his word very clearly makes it crystal clear that marriage is to be a man and a woman, right? And God's law is also very clear that homosexual activity and homosexual lust is wrong, okay, in and of itself. And so the churches that complain, oh, well, we think that is short-sighted, we think that is prejudice, we think that is bigoted. What they're really doing is calling God stupid. That's what they're really doing. They're really calling God unholy. They're calling God wrong. They're saying God has done wrong things. He's put wrong rules in his word, wrong commands in his law. That's really what's going on. And so Paul here in Romans, when he's talking about the purpose of the law, one of the points that he really wants to get across to people is that when you find the immutable, unchangeable will of God, the moral law, parts of the moral law, whatever piece it happens to be, you have to, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, whether you find it pleasant or not, it is still, it is from God, and therefore it is intrinsically, essentially holy and perfect and righteous. So that's one point that Paul wants to really hammer when we get to the point where we're looking at sanctification and how do we keep God's law, what laws do we keep as believers. We have to recognize that all of the law is holy. It is good. Well, again, we may not like it. We may not agree with it. We may think there's problems with it. But that's our problem, not God's problem. Right? Moving on. The next point, the third point there. God's law is just, for it is consistent to the rules of equity and right reason. If you really want to know what's equal, if you really want to know about equal rights, look in the Bible. The Bible gives us the true definitions of equal rights. Okay, and I would say one thing that is very clear in the Bible, and one thing that is very clear in God's view of life and whatever, as far as the law is concerned, is that to be prejudiced or to be bigoted against somebody because that person was bigoted or prejudiced against somebody else at a previous time, okay, that is wrong. Okay, two wrongs do not make a right. Your mother told you that, okay, or your father told you that, or you learned that. Two wrongs do not make a right. Okay, so when for example, universities would say, well, because African Americans weren't allowed, let's say in Harvard, we're going to make a new rule that we're going to allow twice as many African Americans into Harvard as Caucasians. Okay, so we're going to discriminate against Caucasians the same way, or even worse, than the African Americans were discriminated against 100 years ago. That is not equity. That is not equal. That does not, you're not justified in doing that. That is not justified ever, okay, to do another wrong to another group, okay, because of the way that group maybe did a wrong against another group. That is, no, that is not allowed in God's law. God does not have any reverse discrimination. You cannot find reverse discrimination in the Bible, all right? That God says, well, okay, since you did this to the Egyptians, then the Egyptians get to do this to you, this wrong to you. You're not going to find that anywhere. Right? That is wrong. So our country in the last 50 years, 60 years maybe, and it's getting worse and worse and worse as time goes on. We're talking about reparations for now, taking money from you because a distant ancestor maybe was a slave owner, or maybe not. How is that going to be equal? First of all, how are they going to determine who did and who did not have slaves? They're going to say, well, just because your family was from Alabama, you had slaves? That's not true. That's not true. Only about a quarter of the Southerners at the time of the war between the states had slaves. Only about a quarter of them, all right? The second thing is, how are you going to prove, exactly how you're going to prove that the people you want to give this money to were slaves? How are you going to prove that? Yeah, some of them do have good family records, but most of those family records are very bad, and they really weren't kept really well. And most of those people will have no way of proving that they were enslaved persons. That's the new woke way of saying it. And so that's ungodly. That's ungodly to take money from a person, no matter how rich he is. No matter whether you can afford it or not, that's not the issue. But it's ungodly. It's unholy to take money from one person and give it to another based on this color of their skin. That's the definition of bigotry. That's the definition of prejudice. That's the definition of discrimination. So, like I say, human beings look at things. They say, well, we're trying to equalize stuff. No, if you want real equity, that word equity, equilibrium, if you really want that, look to God. Stop there. Rules of equity and right reason. The ways of the Lord are always right. It is good in its design. It was given for the good of mankind, for the conservation of peace and order in the world. It makes the keepers of it good. The intention of it was to better and reform mankind. Okay? That's the purpose of the law, okay? Especially after the fall, obviously, is to reform those who are doing evil and to make it better. I mean, you look at what causes crime, what causes difficulties, what causes these problems in the world, poverty and all this kind of stuff. In almost every case, you can direct it back to a breaking of God's moral law, right? Again, there's nothing wrong with a person that happens to be rich. God makes people rich. God makes people poor. God determines in the final analysis, it's God that determines what gifts people have and how much treasure they have and how much wealth they have, or if they have none at all. It's in the end, it's really God who determines that. And therefore, for mankind to come along and say, well, we're going to redistribute the wealth. Okay. Well, okay. That can be okay. In a limited sense, all right, and we do that. That's fine. If the country decides, well, it would be better if, let's say, for example, the country decides to build a pipeline from the Great Lakes to Arizona, okay, or California for water, all right, and so you may not agree with it. You may think it's silly. But the country says, hey, Congress says, hey, that's the best way to prevent droughts in the future, we're going to do that. We're going to build a big pipeline, a big old thing of pipe, and we're going to stretch it across the country. We're going to send the water from Lake Superior all the way to LA, let's say, or Phoenix. Okay, and then they're going to tax you. They're going to charge you. They're going to charge every human being in the whole country, every man, woman, well, every family, I guess we could say, in unit. We're going to charge them a certain amount of money. Okay, that's in a way that's redistributing wealth in a certain sense, especially since water is wealth in this world. You have water rights someplace, you've got a lot of wealth. Okay, so we're redistributing that wealth. We're taking wealth away from people in Wisconsin and Michigan and whatever, and we're sending that wealth to Phoenix or LA. Okay. That, again, kind of for the betterment of the whole nation, well, and so, well, that's okay. That's okay. But to, like, there's new law in California. There's a new law in California that if your house is worth more than $5 million, okay, then your property taxes are twice what the property taxes of people under $5 million is. Okay? And if your house is worth $10 million, then your property tax is 3 times what other, and they take that money, and they've specifically said this money is for homeless, and this money is for poverty people on the street, and whatever, for drug programs, and so on and so forth. Okay, well, that's immoral. That's immoral. You want to charge them a little extra more because they're wealthy. Well, okay. I don't think God is going to sneeze at that, but 2 and 3 times, that's again the laws of greed. God's comments about greed. Jesus' comment, "The poor you shall always have with you." These people are always going to be around. You can't change that. Some people just simply do not want to work. Some people simply do not want to. I find it humorous that the governments, for example. And again, this is very obvious in California. They round up people. What they're doing, I don't know. I read the papers from over there because I have a house over there, so I'm up on this. But maybe you don't know this. There's a program in the LA area that takes it contacts all of the hotels in the whole area. And it asks them to report on a daily basis how many empty rooms they have. In other words, at the end of the day, if they've got 300 rooms in the hotel and 200 of them are with guests in them, but they've got 100 rooms that are empty, they report that, okay? And then what the city does at various times of the year, for various reasons, usually when there's a big parade or a bowl game or a political convention, right, they don't want to see the homeless, and so they come by and they scoop them all up, they net them, they put them in a big net, and they scoop them all up and all their stuff, okay, and they take them to these hotel rooms. They put them in these hotel rooms for 3 or 4 days, sometimes a week, sometimes longer, okay, and what they find is surprising to them is that quite a few of these people, I don't know exactly what the percentage is, but quite a few of these people don't even stay one night. They go in and maybe they take a hot shower and maybe they, eat some food that's left there, or, because some of the food banks drop food off and whatever, they eat food. And then, maybe they'll stay a night, maybe they won't, but then they're gone. And they go right back out under a tree somewhere. And they go right back out to the parks, and they go right back out to the washes and ravines. And the politicians in town, just don't get it. They don't understand. They go, why? Hey, we give them this nice hotel room, and we ask them to stay there, and they don't stay. They leave, and they can't figure it out. And in San Diego, they just finished building a place. I forget how many. Little apartments, those little tiny little studio apartments. I think it's 50 or 100, something like that, and a place downtown. And hardly any homeless people showed up to take advantage of it. Mm-hmm. And so the advocates, the people that deal with them on a daily basis, they went out and they asked them. They found someone. They said, "Hey, here's this place." No, I don't want to go there. I like sleeping under the stars. I do. I like being able to come and go as I please. I like to do what I want to do. I like to go where I want to go. If I want to pick through the garbage, I like to do that. If I get a panhandle, get a few bucks, I like to do that. I like to I don't like schedules. I don't like schedules. I don't like, that place. I go to that place at breakfast is only from, 6 to 10. Well, what if I want to eat breakfast at 11 o'clock? This was the reasoning that they were giving these people, and the advocates and the politicians. And the politicians just didn't get it. Well, why did Jesus say that? The poor you shall always have with you. Because some people just don't want to work. They just don't. Some people just don't want to take orders from anybody. They just don't. They cannot take orders from anybody. Not on a long-term basis, maybe a day or two, but that's it. They just don't want to do anything but exactly what they want to do. Whether it's take drugs, whether it's get drunk, whether it's eat garbage, whatever it is, they want to do what they want to do, and that's the end of it. And politicians just can't see that. They just can't get that. So in God's view, in God's view of looking at it, taking money from you who worked hard for your money and used God's talents and give your offerings to church and all this kind of stuff. You do what's your right thing with your wealth. Taking that from you and giving it to wasting it on somebody like that, that's again unholy. That's ungodly, right? Bruce, did you have a comment?
Well, I was watching a homeless special many months ago before Christmas. I think it was even before Thanksgiving, and they interviewed a lot of people. I believe it was in San Francisco, and they were saying they don't want to be confined to one space.
Yeah, right.
If they're outside, they can move around.
Right.
And one of them said, "Why do I want to be in a room where all the police have to do is enter one door and they have me?"
Yeah.
And I thought that was probably the most honest experience
Yeah,
I ever heard of why people want to live on the street.
Yeah, very true, very true, very true. Freedom. They really want the ultimate expression of freedom, which is to just do whatever they want to do. And if they want to wear dirty clothes, they wear dirty clothes. And if they want to, sleep on the sidewalk, they sleep on the sidewalk. They want to take a poop, in your lawn, they do so. And just whatever they want to do. And that's it. That's all it is. It's real simple. But the politicians just can't get it. They just don't understand what's going on with these people. And it doesn't take I don't think it takes a genius, rocket scientist, to figure this out, especially like you say, and these people have said this for decades. I can remember my grandmother talking about the hobos, back during the Depression. The same exact stuff. They like riding the rails, they liked it. They liked their little hobo camps, they liked that. And somebody would, my grandfather, and then my father after him, would offer them jobs, hey, and sometimes they take it for a day or a week, make a little bit of money, and then boom, they were gone. They were gone. I remember going down with my dad one day to the welfare office downtown. We were short of lemon pickers one summer, or this was fall actually, and we were short, and we needed some more lemon pickers, and so we went down to the welfare office there in Yuma, and it was downtown, the old downtown, and a big long line of guys, big long line of people. And the old man, and I remember him standing up in the back of his pickup. This was probably, 63, 64, somewhere around in there. And standing on the back of his pickup. And hey, he's yelling, we got jobs, we got lots of jobs, I got lots of positions, I pay you a piece rate, and you could make, in those days, you could make $50 a day. And that was pretty good in 64, you can make $50 a day. You can make $250, $300 a week. Come on, we'll get you a job. And he treated his workers really, really well. He had a camp for them. They could a bunkhouse where they could bunk, and all kinds of stuff. And he paid in cash. He didn't give you a check that you had to go someplace and check. He always paid all of his pickers in cold, hard cash. And he paid them every day. And if you wanted to work a week, fine, but you got paid at the end of the day. How many ever sacks of lemons you picked, you got paid for that. That's what you got paid. And piece rates, like I said, you can make good money. I still remember, you know, when he got down off the back of the pickup and, you know, had his clipboard there and, all right, sign up, you know. Nobody moved. Nobody got out of the line to get their welfare and came over and you know, signed up. Nobody.
Getting free money and they don't have to work
Right.
out from welfare.
And it wasn't as much money as they could make picking, but it was enough, you know, to keep them in line, you know, or whatever. And, you know, he just, you know, he got back in the truck and he threw the clipboard over, you know, yeah, well, file that one away. And I asked him one day, after he did this 2 or 3 times, you know, I asked him, I said, how come you do this? He says, well, I don't want anybody to say I didn't give him a shot. You know, so I give him a shot. And his friends in the farming business, the melon growers in the summertime and the lettuce growers in the summertime and all these other, they do the same thing and get nobody to take it, you know? Bruce?
I just don't understand why people look at the homeless in a different way. They want their freedom. They want to do whatever they want to do. As soon as they get some money, they're going to spend it on whatever they want to spend it on. We do the same thing. We work because we want to work.
Right.
We also know we need the money to give the lifestyle that we're accustomed to. They're accustomed to a totally different lifestyle.
Right.
We can't hold our goals and our aspirations to these people. They're totally different.
Right.
And their expectations on life are totally different.
Yep.
That's why when I see homeless people asking for money, I don't give them any money because that's your choice to be doing it. And it's my choice not to give it to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I never hold them in, I never hold them in any bad esteem.
No.
It's just their choice in life. And I respect that. It's nothing, I would like a workplace every night.
Yeah.
To sleep comfortably.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's my goal.
Yeah.
My only goal.
Yeah.
And, well, and so anyway, but, so I never understood why people always look down on the homeless. That's their choice. It's your choice for it to bother you.
Well, it's not so much anymore looking down on now. We gotta fix this. You know, well, it's not fixable.
Well, that's what I'm saying, because it's their choice, regardless if you give them a 2-bedroom apartment.
Yeah.
They're not gonna wanna live in it.
They would have to change their whole way of being, and that's just not likely. Dale?
They are the freest people in the world.
Yeah, they are, aren't they?
Really are.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are.
Most people don't really want to be.
No, everybody, I think in the long run, most of us want to be taken care of. You know, most of us want police officers around to keep bad guys from doing stuff to us. You can see why the homeless don't care for police officers most of the time, because most of the time they hassle them, of course, and the other most of the time they take care of themselves. You know, and so you're always seeing these homeless camps. You know, a lot of murders take place, a lot of knifings. You know, a lot of beatings take place because, just like my grandmother said, the hobos, they have their own rules. They have their own rules. They have their own law. They are a law unto themselves. And you know, they just, you know, they want to take care of it themselves. And again, that's part of their freedom. And they don't want somebody coming in and saying, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do, you know. But, you know, what's a funny thing is, too, you know, then they do make their own laws. And so, you know, their freedom is not perfect either, because there's certain things you can't do in a homeless camp. You know, there's certain things that are, you know, you cross the line. And so even they, you know, every society, I don't care if it's pygmies in Africa or, you know, jungle people in Philippines or wherever it is, every society has laws. Every society has laws. And if you don't,
Only 2 people.
if you don't follow the law, they throw you out. And that's just the way it is. Yeah.
One thing
Yeah.
said, with the exception of mental illness, because
Well, yeah.
if you have mental deformities or mental illness, and you're out on the street screaming at everybody or saying that Christ and
Yeah,
stuff
right,
like that,
right.
then that's totally different.
Well, and you also have to add one more thing. Still, a lot of that mental illness is caused by their lifestyle, by the drugs that they take, by the alcohol they take in, by the bad nutrition that they have, and all that. It affects your brain, and so it's kind of a vicious circle, you know. So, all right, let's go on. Got to finish this so we can go to the next section. wherever there is true grace, there is an assent to this, that the law is holy, just, and good. So the point is, if you're a believer, again, you're not going to complain about God's law. You're not going to moan and groan and carry on that God is dumb and God made a bad rule. If you are a person of grace, that is God's grace. The law is spiritual, not only in regard to its effects, since it's a means of making us spiritual, but in regard to its extent. It reaches our spirit. It lays a restraint upon and gives direction to the motions of the inward man. It is a discerner of thoughts and intents of the heart. Okay? So the law also, how you keep the law or how you don't keep the law, your thoughts on the law tell me, if I'm asking you questions about the law as your shepherd, as your pastor, and your responses, I can tell what's in your heart. Okay? Paul sets out to prove that it's not the law that's sinful. So it's not the law that's wrong. Okay? It's we, by showing the results of the application of the law to our life. God's perfect law reveals our imperfections. We would not have recognized our true sinful nature without the comparison the law provides for our character and the character of God. So what the law does basically, it says, this is God's character. And our response to that shows us what our character is. If God's character says, don't be greedy, don't charge people more than what you need to for your own, take care of yourself, okay? And you react badly to that, you react, the law is supply and demand, by George, and I can charge that much, so I'm going to. That tells me that your faith is very weak. That tells me that you are questioning God. That tells me that you need God's discipline to come on you so that you come around from that way of thinking. Huh? That's what it tells me. And so the law shows the character of the person. In order to illustrate this point, Paul chooses one of the 10 commandments that reveals a sin that to one's mind is least obvious to be sin, the sin of coveting. And I again, as I said the other day, I think it's real interesting and real instructive that God, through the Holy Spirit, had Paul choose this commandment. And I always tell my Reformed friends who have a different numbering of the 10 commandments, and they always question why shouldn't 9 and 10 be combined into one commandment? And I say, because coveting, we do more coveting than we do anything else. And so we need 2 commandments for it. Okay? The problem is that it is natural for the human heart to long for things. And that's okay. That's okay. You want a bigger house? You want a nicer car? You want more money in your pay envelope? You want better food? Whatever. That's okay. That's fine. Within certain limits, within parameters. Okay? Not all longing is bad, but the law Paul refers to here is, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or maidservant, his ox, donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Okay? So, you shall not covet your neighbor's property. That's the 9th commandment. And you shall not covet your neighbor's possessions. That is the 10th commandment. That's why there are 2 commandments for coveting. Okay? 2 commandments for coveting, one for property, one for personal possessions. Okay? Notice how it's worded. If you go back to Exodus and you go back to the original stating of the 10 commandments, you know how that's your ox, your donkey, your wife, okay? Your servants, etc. And the other one is more general. Okay? The house, the whole thing, okay? Some of that is personal property to you. It's very intimately connected with you. And other of it is just something you own, right? So again, property and possessions. A little bit of difference, a little nuance there. And by giving 2 commandments and by covering those nuances, that's God covers everything. I suppose if you wanted to have just 1 commandment for those 2 ideas, you would just say, do not covet, and leave it at that. But God didn't do that. He split it up into those 2 sections. And the church, by the way, the church for more than 15, almost 1,600 years, and well, in the Old Testament, of course, too, so you go back even more, 1,000 more years before that. Actually, 3,000, you could say 3,000 years. I think it'd be real safe. You could say for 3,000 years, the 10 Commandments were always the same. You had 2 commandments for coveting, and 1 commandment about idol worship and putting God first. And it wasn't until the Reformed people got a hold of it, Calvin and his bunch, nearly almost 1,600 years in the New Testament times, almost 1,600, 1550 anyway, before they decided, no, we're going to split the first one up. We're going to make one about images, statues and paintings and things like that. No, none of those. And then we'll combine 9 and 10. That did not happen, folks. That did not happen until decades after the Reformation started. Okay? So you might just want to think on that every once in a while. When people want, they want to elect certain so-called Christians to government, and the so-called Christians want to take over the government. Well, let me warn you just a minute, okay? Just a minute. Let me warn you, right? That those people, the Baptist types, who want to take over the government and well, we should only have Christians in the government. That's the kind of Christians they're talking to, and they do not agree with you. They do not agree with you. They would outlaw those pictures. Those pictures would be outlawed. The 10 Commandments that judge down in Alabama wanted to put in his courthouse and on the front lawn of the city hall would outlaw those pictures.
Because you're not,
I doubt that seriously, but a crucifix would. Crucifix would be outlawed.
okay, yeah, because you're supposed to worship God,
Right,
not
right.
the thing.
So yeah, these fanatics that are sometimes run for office, and these fanatics who want to post up 10 Commandments in the schools and 10 Commandments and everything, and we get sucked in by that. Okay, we Lutherans, we Orth conservatives, we get sucked in by, oh, all right, you tell them, by George, you get there, absolutely. Want a statue of the 10 Commandments in front of City Hall. Ah! Make sure you check out to see which 10 Commandments it is. Is it the 10 Commandments God gave Moses in Exodus? Or is it the 10 Commandments that Calvin came up with after the Reformation? And 9 times out of 10, I would say 9.9 times out of 10, it's the second one, not the first one. Because they're really high on that idol worship commandment, big time. You know why, of course? Because the silly old Romans have lots of statues of saints and Mary and Joseph and whatever. And Calvin was so hateful toward the Romans, and many of his friends were so hateful towards the Romans, that's the reason they came up with their own way of numbering the commandments, so that their churches wouldn't be full of stained glass windows with pictures in them and statues. And that's the name of that tune, folks. So, again, just a little word of warning. Be real careful before you start thinking rah, rah, rah for some of these knuckleheads that want to make the government more Christian. They don't want to make the government more Christian. What they want to do is make the government more Baptist. That's what they really want to do. And that leaves us out. The problem is, you should own coveting. Ever since the sin entered the world, coveting has been preoccupying the human heart. Covetousness and jealousy are identical twins. Cain killed Abel because Abel had something he did not have. Evidently, David experienced the sin of coveting in his own life. For which reason he wrote, "Do not fret because of evil men or envious thing. Be envious of those who do wrong." Do not desire to be like the wicked who prosper, in other words, right? Asaph must have known the same problem, since he wrote, "But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold, for I envied the arrogant." Notice that. I envied who? Who did he envy? Did he envy the righteous? No, he envied the arrogant. He envied the sinner. Because he saw that in the world, the sinner gets along pretty good sometimes. And that's very true. I don't know. I don't know the heart of some of these really, really rich people, like Elon Musk. I have no idea whether he's a believer or not. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. I have no idea. But let's say he's not. Let's say he's a rank unbeliever. Well, people look at him and say, "Wow, look at this guy. He's the richest man on the face of the earth. He can plunk down $44 billion for a company. That's walking around money for him." Right? And so people want to emulate that. So, yeah, I envied the arrogant. I saw prosperity of the wicked. So, like Job said, why do the wicked prosper? This guy, Asaph, he says, not only, the wicked do prosper, but I would like to be like them. Well, maybe they're prosperous because they're wicked. Like charging 20% interest after they get charged 2%. Huh? There ought to be a law, huh? Well, there is. In God's law, there is. Paul presents to us a vivid picture of a man supposed at first to be without law and therefore unconscious of sin, but then, through law coming in, acquiring a sense of it and yet unable to avoid it. The man assents in his conscience to the good, but is dragged down by the infection of his nature to the evil. So that's talking about Paul here. And it's really talking about every believer. Okay? Every single one of us. Put ourselves in Paul's shoes. Okay? That's exactly what it's talking about. Okay? We start out without the law at all because, of course, we're unbelievers and therefore unconscious of sin. The law comes in. We acquire a sense of it. Okay? We know, all right, we become believers. We're unable to avoid the law. We see breaking the law. We see breaking God's law multiple times a day. So in his conscience, he seeks to do good, but is dragged down by the infection of his evil nature. So he wants to, this is what Paul says, he wants to do good. He wants to keep God's law, but he keeps doing the opposite. He seems to have, as it were, two contrary laws working within him, distracting him. That's perfect. Folks, that little paragraph right there, that's a perfect description of every believer in the world. That's a perfect description of you. When you find yourself miserable because you break God's law, you find yourself miserable because you're not doing what you know you should do, right? That this is a reason right here. This explains it. And so the external law, appealing to the higher law within himself, good and holy as it be, in a sense, killing him, for it reveals sin to him, and it makes it deadly, but does not deliver it from him, until the crisis becomes the desperate cry, as he says, down in verse 24, which we'll get to next time maybe. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of death? This is a believer talking. This is not an unbeliever. This is a believer. A believer very often gets in despair. And again, this is what absolution is for, folks. This is why we have confession and absolution. Oh, please, let me put another plug in for it, right? Because every believer, again, I like to say if you are a believer, but that wouldn't be correct because it's not done much anymore. But every believer gets to a point at some time in their life, sometimes every day, sometimes once a week, sometimes once a month, whatever. We all get to points in our life when we despair. Will I ever be like you want to, let's say, okay, New Year's coming up, New Year resolutions, people are going to make. And some people, I'm sure, every year always make the resolution, I'm going to read through the Bible in a year. Or I'm just going to read some of the Bible every single day. or I'm going to have devotions every day, or I'm going to do this every day, or I'm going to do that every day. And a week or two into January, you go, and we despair. So am I ever going to be able to do the right thing? Am I ever going to be able to just, without even working at it, without even trying hard, am I ever going to just be able to just pick up my Bible and read it every day, like I know I should? Am I ever going to do that? And you get despair, you just, that happens to us. And that, again, that's why we have confession, absolution. And that's why Jesus put that in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses. That's why he put it in there, because we have that feeling every day, and that should be a comfort to us. That should be a comfort to us, that's there. And that's why, again, we have confession, same reason. And even if you only do it once a week in church, you hopefully get that cleansing, get that comforting from that. And okay, all right, well, it's like we should be like, well, okay, we get to the end of the day, okay, I failed again. Yeah, all right, I failed again. I lied, cheated, lusted, whatever. I didn't do things I was supposed to do, and I did a bunch of stuff I wasn't supposed to do. Okay, all right, okay, that's clear. You're forgiven of God. Okay, tomorrow, right back at it. Start 0-0. Start with a clean slate. Go back at it again. That's the grace that we have, and that's what Paul is talking about here. This crisis is the precursor of deliverance. It is the last gasp preceding a new birth. Okay. Now that's not that we get converted every day, but we get forgiven, and we receive that forgiveness every day. The law has now done its work, having fully convinced of sin and excited the yearning for deliverance. And in the law of the Spirit of life in Christ, Jesus Christ, the deliverance comes. This is again where we come to the point that every day, though we don't get reconverted every day, we don't fall in and out of faith every day, as somewhat might think of, but we do get rejuvenated, okay? We do get renewed, and that's every day. Luther talked about that. Luther about drowning the old Adam and coming up out of the water every single day. In his case, sometimes multiple times a day. And that's the beauty of this relationship, this new relationship we have with the law. We are not under the thumbs of the law. Okay? The law is still going to remind us that we're sinners, yes. And the law is still going to guide us into how to keep the law. Yes, that's true. All of that is all very true. But we are not under the law. Okay? We can rise up, be forgiven, be reconciled to God, and then start all over again the next day. And that should be our process. That should be the way that we look at it, rather than stay in despair. And what I see a lot in Christianity today is a lot of people in despair. They're so much in despair, they don't go anywhere near the Bible, and frankly, they don't go anywhere near the church. And I think the church has let their people down. A lot of churches have let their people down and not been telling them what comes after the law, which is forgiveness, peace, grace, and that. And that's why I think one of the reasons why churches are empty, because people have just not heard the gospel, or perhaps they have rejected the gospel, one or the other. So, anything, questions, comments? Okay, no class on the 3rd. No class on the 3rd, okay? But we will have Bible class on Sunday. Even though yes, sir.
Can you erase those first three?
Sure.
Because those are gone.
Okay.
Especially today, it keeps flashing in my face that I was wrong.
There. Is that better? All right. Okay.
It's like a to-do list. Scratch it off.
Gotcha. Let's close. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be and abide with us all. Amen.
Thank you, Beth.
You betcha.
I'll see you later.